Exercise Theory, Chapter 8, Health-Related Benefits of Basic Nutrition. Nutrition is how our food will nourish our body. Nutrition will give us the energy that our body will require for growth, for tissue repair, to maintain our body weight, and to give us energy for our daily activities. Nutrients are what are contained within food, and these nutrients are what carry out these life-sustaining functions. There are 6 groups of nutrients that we'll be discussing. We have carbohydrates, fats, protein, vitamin, minerals, and water. We take in these nutrients through specific steps. First of all, we ingest food, so we consume food, and then it's digested. When food is digested, it is broken down into the different nutrients, and it is broken down within our digestive system, and in our intestines, it will be absorbed into the bloodstream. So once it's broken down far enough, it's absorbed into our bloodstream, and then moving through the blood, it is delivered to every cell in the body. And we have approximately 50 different nutrients that are needed regularly. And like I said, they're broken down to carbohydrates, fats, proteins, vitamins, minerals, and water. We're going to discuss each one individually. So let's begin with carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are our body's main source of energy. Carbohydrates are our vegetables, our fruits, and our grains. Those are carbohydrates, and when we consume those, we break them down into glucose, which will give us sugar. So glucose is sugar, and it's that glucose that we use and break down to give us ATP and energy. If we consume excess carbohydrates, that carbohydrates will be stored as fat. Once it's stored as fat, we can then later take those fat reserves and break them down, transforming them back into sugar to use them at a later time. So carbohydrates, once again, are how our breads and grains and vegetables, we consume them, we break those down, we get sugar. If we require that sugar right away, it goes to our muscles or our organs or our brain, and it is utilized. If we do not require the carbohydrates for immediate use, we will then store them in fat cells. We'll store them as fat in fat cells, and later, if we require the energy, we will bring them out of the fat cells, break it back down to sugar, and utilize it that way. So carbohydrates. The next group is fat. So it's important to note that fat is essential for health. Over the years, fat has gotten a bad reputation. There's a lot of confusion on how fat really works in our diets. So first of all, like I said, it is essential. So we consume fats. We can consume fats through animal byproducts, so our meat, our poultry, fish, etc. will have some fat in there. Those are usually the saturated fats. But so will our vegetables will have forms of fat in it as well. When we ingest that fat, the reason that fat has a bad reputation is that there are a lot of calories per gram. So there's roughly 4 calories per gram of carbohydrate or protein, whereas I believe it's 9 carbohydrates per gram for fat. And so we have to be very careful when we ingest fat, because it could rack up the number of calories we've consumed very, very rapidly. But sometimes people are taking things to the extreme, and so you're having these people that are trying to dramatically and in an unhealthy way reduce their fat intake. That's not a good idea. We have to have our fat. That is how our body will store energy. So that is that's what our fat supplies are for. It's a reservoir of energy. That fat within our bodies will also help to cushion our organs. Fat is required in our bodies and in our bloodstream in order to transport and store fat-soluble vitamins. The big one that we think of is usually vitamin D. Vitamin D is very important to the health. It's very important to our bones. It's very important to our nervous system. And with vitamin D, if we are not taking it and consuming it with fat, we can't absorb it properly. That is why they've opted to put vitamin D in milk products, because milk products will contain some fat, and so that makes it easier to absorb it. The other thing that you need to understand about fat is that every cell in our body has a membrane. A cell membrane is the outer coating of the cell. It's the outside of the cell, and they are comprised. A cell membrane is comprised of fat. So we need to make sure we do have fat in our diet. We want to be careful and watch how much fat we're consuming, because if we consume too much fat, we end up taking in too many calories. But please never think that we need to cut fat out of our diet completely. That would be an unhealthy decision to make. Our third nutrient we're going to talk about is protein. Protein builds the structure of the body. So when we consume protein, we're using that protein to build, maintain, and repair our body tissues. Proteins have amino acids in them. So proteins are comprised of a bunch of amino acids. There are two different groups of amino acids. There are essential and non-essential amino acids. Essential amino acids are amino acids that are not able to be produced by the body itself. Okay, so an essential amino acid has to be consumed as food. We have to take in the essential amino acids. The non-essential amino acids are ones that our body can create itself. So as we just ingest food, our body builds these other amino acids. So we do have 9 essential amino acids. These amino acids will also be determined on whether or not you have a complete or an incomplete protein. So complete proteins are protein sources that contain all 9 essential amino acids. So the example of a complete protein would be the animal byproducts. So meat, fish, poultry, eggs, dairy. Those are complete amino acids. So when we consume them, we know we're getting all 9 of the amino acids we require. Another one too, sorry, I forgot to mention, is soy. Soy is also another complete amino acid. Our vegetable sources are usually incomplete proteins, which means that they do not contain all amino acids. So this is something that vegetarians need to be aware of and plan for. They can still get the full 9 amino acids that they require, the 9 essential amino acids, but usually it's done in combinations of food. So vegetarians will choose to combine certain foods to make sure they have all 9 amino acids. Okay, all the 9 essential ones. So that's the difference between a complete and an incomplete amino acid. And once again, protein is a structure. This is the structure of our body is what our protein is. This is often why when we finish a workout, we talk about taking in protein, because following our workout, our body is going to absorb and utilize more amino acids to build muscle and to build bone. The final 3 nutrients are vitamins, minerals, and water. Vitamins are going to trigger reactions in cells. You could think of a vitamin almost as a spark plug. It's going to be a catalyst for reactions to occur. And these are specific reactions that are supposed to occur within the body. There are a list of vitamins that are required for general health and wellness. Minerals will do similar things. They might work as triggering reactions in cells. However, they also work as important for structural tissue. So on those things you're thinking, especially calcium or magnesium, required for our bones, for our bone health, for our muscle health. Now, when it comes to vitamins and minerals, there comes to be a lot of concern on whether or not we need supplementation, and a lot of research has been done on whether or not we need to be taking multivitamins, etc. This is why we have our Canada Food Guide. The Canada Food Guide was created so that we get a variety of foods that we should fulfill all of our requirements for carbohydrates, fats, proteins, vitamins, and minerals. That was the general design behind the Canada Food Guide and why they recommend such a variety of foods when we're eating. So ideally, with a nice wide variety, you should get everything you need naturally in your diet and should not need to have to supplement additionally. The last nutrient is water, and water is very, very important. This is what's going to make up our blood plasma, so the fluid part of our blood. It's going to be our blood that's going to help to regulate our body temperature, and in that fluid within the blood itself, this is what's going to carry nutrients and chemicals to the cell and carry waste away from the cells to leave the body. This is the fluid in the body is what gives us what we call the osmotic pressure to be pushing nutrients in and out of the cells. So water is absolutely vital. 45 to 75% of our body weight is water. We will be talking specifics later about making sure you're remaining hydrated, but it is worth noting that certain groups of individuals are more susceptible to issues with dehydration, and these groups are going to be older people, pregnant women, and children. In classes, we want to be paying close attention to these groups, as well as paying attention to the environment. So on very hot, humid days, we're much more concerned about water intake. So Canada's Food Guide, like I've already mentioned, what they've done with the Canada Food Guide is they've taken the nutrients that we require in our diet and laid it out by giving us certain servings of things, so that if we follow the food guide and consume the servings that are recommended and the food groups that are recommended, we will have our complete nutrients that are required. Our food guide will also give us eating tips, and it does describe the eating requirements for males and females in different age groups and categories. It also does emphasize the importance of combining physical activity with healthy eating. One of the most valuable things I find on the Canada's Food Guide is the portions. It will let us know what is considered to be a serving. So you'll find in the food guide itself, it will say 1 serving of grains is this. So, a slice of bread would be a serving of grains. That really sort of helps people monitor their portions. A lot of times where people run into troubles with food intake is controlling portion size. So it helps with that. The other thing that the Canada Food Guide really does is emphasize variety, that you're getting a little bit of everything, that you try different things. And the other thing is that it recommends that you limit items that might be considered not quite as healthy, such as salt, high-fat items, alcohol. But it actually doesn't tell you to avoid anything. It's trying to have a realistic view of our diets. I'll also point out that if you go and check online, there's wonderful resources for different ethnic groups, especially Aboriginals. There's specific food guides for different ethnic groups that might be more suitable for the food that they actually ingest. So certain ones will have more options with wild game and where you'd fit that into the food guide. So please know these resources are out there and very, very valuable. So the food guide is divided into 4 different food groups. It's divided bases on different things. So first of all, it can be foods originated from the same agricultural base. So that we'll have grains, and then we'll have fruits and vegetables, meat and alternatives, and dairy products. So they have that same agricultural base. Some of the divisions are due to how they've been classified in earlier food guides. So the food guide is frequently under revision, frequently updated. I believe we're supposed to be having an update relatively soon that they'll be working on this. The other way that they do divide our food groups is into how people use the foods. So the example of that is that we have a meat and alternatives. It acknowledges that not everybody consumes animal byproducts, so it offers options such as legumes for protein source instead of meat. So that is how we divide up the food groups. So take a moment, you should have a copy of the Canada Food Guide. So make sure you take a moment to look at your recommended guidelines for fruits and vegetables. What should you be eating? How would those numbers change if you were older or younger? just start to get comfortable with it. Take a moment and look to see what food portions look like for different foods. Like I said, that's often where we make a mistake, especially it tends to be a little bit the carbohydrates that we go wrong on, where we assume that this huge heaping bowl of pasta is one serving, and in reality it's not. It's multiple servings. So we want to be careful always with portion. Um, like I mentioned, the food guide servings are a measured amount of food. So these servings will help us evaluate or plan our food intake every day. So you could keep track of what you're consuming, making sure you're going to balance. And it gives lots of examples in there, and I believe also online will even give you more resources. A big concern is active people. So all of a sudden somebody starts working out and goes, I need more protein. I need to be consuming more protein. Exercise does increase your body's need for more protein. However, a lot of studies have actually shown that physically active people already consume enough protein, that there might not be a requirement for additional, that in our diets already we've taken in enough. So please don't assume because somebody has started exercising that all of a sudden they need, 4 protein shakes a day, which would be a crazy amount of protein. So please really do not consume 4 protein shakes a day. But my point being that we don't want to start adding all this copious amount of extra protein. We already probably have enough naturally. So a little advice that you can give your participants and people you work with is where you should shop for groceries. When we go into the grocery store, we're inundated with options and choices, and it can be overwhelming. A lot of you that will be listening to this, you have been very active in the fitness industry. You've already learned a lot about food choices, etc. Your participants might not have been exposed to the same sort of experiences, so it's worthwhile to mention to them that grocery stores are usually laid out with the 4 food groups around the perimeter, the outside. So the produce section has our fruits and vegetables. Our bakery section has our fresher grain products. Dairy will be milk and alternatives, and then the deli or butcher counter will be our meat and alternatives. And it's really recommended that you have your participants shop on the outside of that supermarket so that they get fresh food, so that they're getting less processed food. It is also often more expensive food. So then once they've gone and collected the fresh food they get, then you can go and get canned or frozen or packaged versions that might be a little bit cheaper or better for storage. So really be aware of that if you stick to the perimeter, you're probably making the healthier choices. We want to try to consume as much whole natural food as possible. That's really going to give us the largest variety of nutrients. So 5 key steps that we really should do. We should enjoy a variety of foods, have a variety of all of the food groups. Make sure that when you're looking at fruits and vegetables, you're looking at different colored fruits and vegetables with meats and alternatives, that you're not just eating the same thing every day, but you're getting a variety. If you consume animal protein, that you're having chicken some days, some red meat some days, and then making sure you get that fish in there as well as making sure you also get non-animal based protein sources. So get a nice variety. You want to make sure you emphasize the vegetables and fruit servings, especially the vegetables, and choose a nice wide color palette of vegetables. Make sure you're not just eating carrots all day every day, but rather you're getting some red peppers in there. You're getting some nice dark green leafy vegetables. When we get to dairy products, choosing lower fat dairy products, choosing leaner meats, and foods prepared with minimal fat. Once again, we need to consume that fat. That fat is good for us. That fat is healthy for us. However, we don't want excess levels of fat, and we do want to make sure we're staying away from trans fats. You want to work at achieving and maintaining a healthy body weight by enjoying both regular physical activity and healthy eating. It needs to be a combination of the two. And you want to make sure that you limit your salt, alcohol, and caffeine intake. So we're not going to avoid completely, but we want to limit it. If you are choosing to eat whole natural foods, this allows you to tend to limit your salt intake. If you're consuming a little bit more packaged or processed foods, please be really aware of your daily intakes for fat and how much you're getting with processed foods. The one nutrient we haven't really mentioned, so Canada Food Guide will be talking about our proteins, our carbohydrates, our fats, our vitamins, our minerals. So that does leave us with water. So we do need to know that dehydration can negatively affect performance. So exercise performance begins to become impaired when you are dehydrated by as little as 2% of your body weight. If you start to lose more than 5% of your body weight, it can actually decrease your capacity for work by about 30%. The take-home message is you have to remain hydrated. Make sure that you encourage your participants to drink water before activity, during activity, and after activity. And as I mentioned earlier, if they are going to be exercising in very hot, humid situations, that they want to make sure that they are consuming extra fluids to make up for that extra heat. So discussion questions. What is a complete protein, and provide some examples? So a complete protein is a protein that contains all 9 essential amino acids. The complete proteins would be your animal byproducts, so your meat, poultry, fish, as well as eggs and dairy. The non-animal source that's most common would be soy. This would be contrasted with the incomplete protein sources, which would be usually our plant-based protein sources, which if the individual is a vegetarian, needs to make sure that they're consuming a wide variety of plant sources so that they get all of the nutrients they need, all the amino acids. Use a moment to look at the food guide serving suggestions for adult, females, and males. So make sure you go through the food guide. Get comfortable with the 4 different food groups and what the food guide serving suggestions are. So how many you should be having. And at what percentage of dehydration affects exercise performance? When you're dehydrated by as little as 2% of your body weight.